Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. Omari, is Offseason O officially gone? Did it change on Twitter today? I feel like you're back in business. Vacation is over. Time to get back to work, my guy.
Yeah, I changed it last week because I was like writing stuff. And then I was like, well, I don't want to publish stuff. I want people to read it. It's like Offseason O. Like Offseason O is for vacation. And Omari Sankofa II is all about business. So I changed it like last Wednesday or Thursday. Or something like that. And, I shed my single tear and then I kept it pushing because we have media day today and training camps tomorrow. And we're off. We're off to the races.
Omari, this is our 90th episode. Do you realize that 90 episodes for the Pistons Pulse? I want to point out, Motor City Hoops never made 100. We thought we were going to get there. It didn't quite get there before we started this. Obviously, this was the best thing that ever happened to Wes and I, but we're slowly inching to the 100th episode for the Pistons Pulse. Pretty excited. Don't know what we'll have in store, but just had to bring that up real quick, man. 90 episodes we've done together now.
Yeah, 90 is such a big number. And it's just crazy to think we'll be episode 100 in 2.5 months, which places us somewhere in December, assuming we don't do any special episodes before then, which unless they make a blockbuster trade, I don't see why we would. Knock on wood. Super exciting. Yeah, I mean, 100 is a big number. I don't even know what to say. We've been doing this like a year and a half, and that's a really big number. So we'll have to figure out something fun to do for that one for sure.
Everybody watching live here, thank you guys for joining us. 90 great episodes from you two. You appreciate it. You can see the energy in the chat already, Omari. We got people going, hey guys, yo, it's media day from our guy, RB Nesbitt. You can just tell the energy is up. We're going to be all over the place. We got all sorts of media day quotes and themes and topics. We're going to hit as much of it as we can. If you have some questions, drop them in the chat. We'll save them. We'll try to get to them at the end. And also, next week, we are going live after the game versus the Suns. So the Pistons have their first preseason game on Sunday. It won't be immediately after the game because Omari has this job where he has to write articles after the game. But a little bit later, Sunday evening, we'll go live and break that down. But Omari, what was it like being back in the building today? What was the vibe? What was the energy like from the team, the organization, new head coach, some new players? Just what was the vibes on?
First, shout out Bryson. I met a guy named Bryson, a mutual friend, like a week and a half ago, and he told me he was a big fan of the pod. So it was cool to kick it with you and talk basketball. And I'm sure I see you around. So first, shout out Bryson. Second, I guess the first day always kind of feels like the first day of school, but this year was probably the year felt the least like the first day of school just because we're just familiar with most of these guys. But I know we've been covering most of the teams since their first day. So like that familiarity is there. So you don't necessarily feel like the newness, I guess, that you get on the first day of training camp every now and then. But beyond that, I would also say just being, I guess, in the 4th year of the rebuild, it was more like just getting back to business today, right? It wasn't, hoping that, players, I don't know, like development-wise, it was more so we are going to make guys earn it, right? We're going to have competition in camp. We're going to do this and that, and it's just going to be a turning of the page to an extent. So I think with that, just very business as usual today, but also a little bit more focused, a little bit more, we want to do something this season. And, it's time to start turning the page and getting better on defense, getting better on offense, Cade, make the leap, this and that.
Let me ask you this, Omari. Is there any big difference between a Monty Williams interview and a Dwayne Casey interview? I mean, everything we've heard about both, and we'll have some Monty Williams quotes from the guys about who he is as a person. But was there anything that kind of struck you of this is just a little bit different? Not necessarily good or bad, but just different.
We haven't talked to Monty a whole lot. We talked to him at his press conference and after the draft, obviously, and then today. So today was probably only the 3rd or 4th time we talked to him since he was hired, just in a press conference setting. But they're just different people. Monty and Dwayne, they just have very different dispositions. Like one thing players say about Monty, it's just the fact that he played in the NBA, and then he has a lot of guys on the staff who played in the NBA. Like that means a lot. And he's just known around the league as just having this calm family presence. And, like Dwayne kind of has that presence too, right? He's known as a family man and very respected around the league. So there are some similarities there, but just the dispositions are very different. And it's tough to explain how, but I think if you've seen Dwayne at the podium, you see Monty at the podium, they just have different energies, right? I think Dwayne's probably a little bit more upbeat. Monty's very laid back. And we also haven't seen Monty in as many scenarios. We haven't seen him after a tough win or a tough loss or, a really big loss. So there are some sides to Monty that will be uncovered as we get deeper into this process. So it's tough to compare just because we spent so much time with Dwayne and we're still getting to know Monty.
Does that stress you out a little bit, Omari, as a beat writer? Are you a little bit worried about the first blowout loss or the first crushing loss at the buzzer and kind of how Monty's going to handle it? What kind of questions? Because after this many years, you probably had a feel for what you could ask Dwayne and when you could ask it. With Monty, it may take, hey, I asked this question and I get this certain answer or this look or whatever, and you got to kind of fill that out. So I don't know if stress is the right word, but you think about that, having to kind of navigate that with a new coach?
Yeah, you learn. There's probably a different style of asking questions for, different people. You just get a feel for like how they answer certain things, questions they like, questions they dislike, and the timing and whatnot. So we're still figuring that out for Monty. Anytime you have a new coach, there's like that filling out process. I would say in general, I expect to upset people kind of anyway, just because that's just part of the job. It's occasionally asking a question they don't like or writing something they don't like. So, I just sort of expect that at some point I will make Monty not happy, because of a question I asked after a game or whenever, and that's just part of it. But at the same time, I mean, he just has such a relaxed demeanor. And, of course, everybody talks about the basketball knowledge. So it'll be cool to be able to pick his brain on certain things, see what he has to say about certain guys. And certainly how he handles the media after wins and losses, because that's always a filling out process.
It's mostly a positive day. People are excited, but I want to go ahead and get this kind of negative, sad news out of the way. Isaiah Livers' ankle injury out 6 to 8 weeks. And this came from Livers, said he got hurt during a pickup game last week. Just a fluke play where someone stepped on his ankle. He's not in a walking boot or using crutches. Obviously, this is direct quote from Livers now. Obviously, I wish I could have avoided it at all costs. Control what you can control. So just some disappointing news there around Isaiah Livers, who a lot of people thought had a chance to really crack this rotation.
Yeah, it's just tough. I mean, I even talked to him a couple months ago about how his whole offseason regime was just about staying healthy, right? Like stretching, preparing his body, just taking on less of a workload compared to past off seasons, because he said he would train 2-3 times a day. And then by the time you get to camp, your body's already worn out. So just a really tough break for him, honestly. He said it was just a fluke injury. They were playing basketball last week, and I guess somebody stepped on his ankle wrong, and he tweaked it that way. But, for it to be a grade 3 strain, which could keep him out for 2 months, it's just tough. I think he missed 30 games last year. I think he played 17 as a rookie because he came back from that stress fracture, which was on his right foot. Now he sprains his left foot. So, you hope that he can put his injury issues behind him, of course. And some of them he said have just been flukes, unavoidable. So maybe the bad luck will wear off and we'll see him get back.
Yeah. And there's a question we'll talk about later about where that puts this rotation. And there's still an open roster spot, but there was a little bit of a hole at the 4. And that's obviously something some people felt like he could play. I want to talk about the rookie Ausar Thompson. Going through the quotes, and all I really looked at, Omari, was what you were tweeting out and then dumped those into the outline. 5 different players, 4 different plus Ausar, talked about his defense. So I'm going to start with what Cade said, because it kind of talked about him as a whole player as well. He plays winning basketball. He connects the floor really well. His playmaking ability should be talked about more because he's a willing passer, but he's able to read the floor really well. And the way he gets after it on the defense will be huge from day one. Thought that was high praise from Cade Cunningham. And it stood out to me that a theme of Media Day was people praising Ausar Thompson on the defensive end.
Pretty much everybody we asked about Ausar had nothing but good things to say. We saw what he did at Summer League, right? I mean, he's a freak athlete, just very instinctive defender. But today, it was more so parsing what type of role he'll have early on. And all the signs suggest that he'll be a pretty significant part of the rotation to start because of his defense. Alec Burks said he's ready to defend some of the top players like right now. I mean, that's high praise as it gets right there. So we'll see. I'm curious to see if he can play more power forward with Isaiah Livers out. Ausar did mention he could play 1 through 4, so clearly he's thinking about it. And, just lineup wise, what parts of his skill set will they try to tap into the most, right? Like, will it just be crash the boards? I mean, he does everything, right? You don't just focus on one thing, but just lineup wise, I'm curious to see what positions they put him in and how much he's able to tap into everything.
Yeah, and you ask Ausar directly if he's ready to defend the best players. He said, definitely, I'm very confident. I want to guard the best player every night. I always felt like a pretty good defender, but I felt like I learned from Summer League. I think that's really important. If people wonder, what do you get out of Summer League? Well, it gave Ausar a chance to go play a few games at least against close to NBA competition, but at least competition better than the overtime elite. Maybe he got exposed on some things, but then he can learn from those so it's not happening on opening night. I feel like I've taken a little bit of pushback and heat for saying that he could take these matchups of a rookie. Rookie defenders usually aren't that good. They're foul prone. I get all of that. But the quotes coming out of Media Day to me seems like they're going to kind of put him in that role. The confidence he has to be in that role is important. The confidence his teammates have in him to fill that role. And quite honestly, Omari, it's a role this team needs from a wing, is to take on those matchups. And so maybe eventually you have to take that off his plate, but I'm ready to throw him to the Wolves game 1, first of the season, and just see how it goes.
And especially just how defense focused today's Media Day was as well, where, Troy said we can't be the Pistons until we defend. He talked about just the pickup games after summer and all these things they did to build camaraderie, which they hope will translate into the season as far as their communication on defense. So Ausar, of course, is a big part of that, just being potentially the best defensive wing on this roster, somebody that Troy, drafted specifically because he believes he'll be able to defend and check some of the NBA's best scorers. I don't see how he doesn't have a role, just given that that's his specialty and just everything he's done so far. He's passed every test. He even said he wasn't that happy with his Summer League performance, but he stuffed the stat sheet, did everything you want to do. So I'm curious to see just what role they put him in to begin. Does he start? Does he come off the bench? Is he 4, 3, 2? There's a lot of ways that this could still go.
And Killian said about him, what he's seen from Ausar defensively is how explosive he is. And I think this is why Ausar can be a little more successful than maybe some wings. Killian said he can be late and make a mistake, but he's going to recover and affect the offensive play. So Ausar is so athletic and so twitchy and so explosive that even if he does get out of position or lose awareness or whatever on the weak side, he's so explosive, he can still get back in the play. We've seen that a little bit with Hami. Again, Ausar is another level of that. So I think that adds to why Ausar can still find some success, or it won't be so rough on him as a rookie to take these matchups, is he has this elite, Omari, athleticism for the NBA.
And one thing he talked about just offensively that's translated is his ability to get paint touches. And he talked specifically about either taking a shot there or kicking it back out, right? So he knows how athletic he is. He knows he could blow past a lot of defenders. And then once he gets into the paint, we saw it in Las Vegas. Like, he's a great finisher. Good passer. He'll be able to do dump-off passes to Duran, whoever's down there, swing it to the opposite side for a 3. There's a lot of that. So his defense and the athleticism, of course, is a big part of that as well. And I mentioned this last week too, but I'm curious to see how he looks at the 4. With Isaiah Livers hurt, I think that the door's open for him to do that. And it just seems like his skill set naturally lends itself to being an effective power forward. So I'm curious to see if they put him in that role early on.
I'm with you on that as well. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. We're going to go a little bit off the court, Omari, but I feel myself a little more energized tonight, Omari. I know you've had a long day. I was sitting there watching all your tweets come through. And I'm like, man, he sat in that room and just asked question after question. I just had a JV football game. Unfortunately, we took an L. Proud of my guys, though. They played hard. Essentially, we played without a quarterback. But as soon as we started recording and I saw the chat blowing up, we have a few more viewers tonight, I feel my energy going up. So I say that to say it was interesting what some guys said about just Detroit and the energy around other sports teams. So Isaiah Stewart said, when you see the Lions, the games, and the fans are crazy, they're off to a great start. That definitely gives us some fuel. We want to be one of those teams in Detroit too. So we've talked about this a little bit, Omari, about who kind of dominates Detroit. Obviously, the Pistons players are as well, and they want to get in on that energy that fans have around the Detroit Lions right now.
And they're positioned to do that, right? We saw what the Lions did last year, where you start off weak, but you close the season strong. You create this momentum for the season after. And I think the Pistons have a chance to be in that position. If they're the NBA's version of this season's Lions, then that means a lot of things went right. But I could see them going back to one thing Troy said, is just competing all 82 games, right? Like, we just need to have that competition level where it needs to be, and we have the depth and hopefully experience to do that now. They need to get to that step, right? You know, I think if they could genuinely put a good product on the floor every year, you have some really exciting players in Ausar and Jaden Ivey and Durance. You get some of the casual attention just from the highlights you get. And especially if Cade Cunningham makes that leap to star, things could line up for them in that way. Detroit's a basketball city, of course. Detroit has not really had a great Pistons team since they moved back downtown 6 years ago. And I'm curious to see what that looks like. The Palace had this long sellout streak. I don't even know how many games. It went on for like years. So they were all the way out in the middle of nowhere, basically. Auburn Hills, like a 35, 40-minute drive from where I am in Detroit. And now you're downtown. So I think it would be fun to see a Pistons team that could kind of capture the city and, you know, just see how much it adds to it now that they're downtown and they're just so much more accessible for a lot of fans.
I'm really interested to see what it would look like if they came out and had a good start to the season. They're fun to play and fun to watch. And I think there'd be a lot of energy behind it, along with the Lions winning games as well. You mentioned Cade Cunningham. There's a few quotes that really stood out to me. The first one was Troy Weaver on Cade Cunningham. This one really stood out to me, Amari. He said he can really explode off that leg now and play with his mind being free of not having to worry about his leg. He's stepping into being healthy. He's the linchpin of what we're doing, and we're excited. He has a chance to be a big-time player. I thought that was really interesting that Troy Weaver, mentioned the health in that leg for Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, and explode is a pretty strong word, right? Like, it makes you think that Cade's going to have a zip that he probably lacked as a rookie. And obviously last season he was clearly hobbled, but that shouldn't have been bothering him for a while. So, I mean, of course he comes to the season with a lot of momentum, right? We all saw what he did in Las Vegas with the USA Select team. And now he's fully healthy. And in some ways, this is going to feel like his first season, just in the sense that shin will not be bothering him. They talk about how strong he's gotten. He talks about he's been working on his shooting. So he's been rehabbing and also still working on his skill set. We even saw glimpses of him last year working with John Beeline just on his shot mechanics, right? Like, just the mechanics, not even the ball in his hands. So he's been working on this stuff even while he was hurt. So, you know, does he put it all together day one? Is there like a transition period for him? I think that's what we'll be looking for. But so far, I mean, all the signs have been really good. And I'm just curious to see if that fixed leg really does lead to him showing some stuff we haven't seen from him yet.
And Isaiah Livers mentioned the strength. So he said he noticed Cade's improved strength when playing one-on-one. His bumps were a lot stronger and more forceful. I was like, okay, you've been lifting a little bit. The media was right about you, and he started laughing about it. So it's interesting, you know, we hear about all this stuff in the media, we see the pictures, we talk about the upper body strength, all of that. But when you get it from another NBA player who says, hey, this was real, I could feel it, I could physically feel that added strength and bulk when playing against him, that's a little more meaningful to me.
And we know coming into last season, Cade wanted to bulk up just to be able to take the punishment of the NBA more. So he continued that this past offseason. And you can look at him, you can just see that physically he's come a pretty long way since his rookie season. So I'm curious to see how he can wield that physicality as well. Like what we see him post up, you know, exactly how is that going to translate to the court? Because, you know, Cade, even if he is more explosive, he's probably not going to be like that first step guy. It's still going to be a lot of craft and a lot of just him being able to bump guys out of the way, which he was extremely good at as a rookie, even if he was 10, 15 pounds lighter. So now he'll just add to that on top of that. And he was moving a lot of guys out the way, like 7-foot guys, like with 40 pounds on them. So it's not like he lacks strength. So I'm curious to see how that translates this year.
Yeah, I'd like to see it, though. I always said, you know, people talk about, you know, Cade, maybe not that explosive, not that athletic, but I was always more, I'd rather see him just get stronger, just play and lean into playing through angles, playing through contact. One last one on Cade before we go to break here, Amari. Ausar, again, says he doesn't seem like he's 22. So speaking to what you just, Cade's still just 22, but Ausar said he seems like he's a 10-year vet, just the way he conducts himself. His leadership is crazy for someone so young. Again, this is something we've talked about with Cade, the intangibles, being the face of the franchise, being a leader, and you hear a young player like Ausar speaking to that. There were some other quotes as well, but I think Cade truly, and it helps when you're on the court, right, Omari? It's kind of hard to be that guy when you're hurt, like we saw last year, but he's feeling healthy, That's going to help him individually, but now he's on the court, and I'm really interested to see if we continue to see him kind of grow and flourish in that leadership role.
Yeah, I mean, several people today mentioned that Cade just seems so much older than his age. I think Alec Burks said he has an old soul.
Yeah,
and I mean, even like first day he came into like the NBA with the Pistons, he had that maturity to him, where it's like, this dude is like 19, like what he was like, I guess I was 27 when he was drafted, and he easily could have passed as like somebody my age. So that maturity stands out. I think Cade has a presence to him that the guys really respect. And Cade talked about almost being more like a coach last year, sitting on the sidelines, seeing the game from a different angle. You see teammates' tendencies, and you learn a lot just from watching, right? Like not being out there, but just having a set of eyes on the entire floor as a whole. So all those things could pay off for him this season. And yeah, like he is the most grown 22-year-old probably in the NBA. I was talking to a coworker last week, and they were like, he's only 22? Like I thought he was like 25, 26 at the least. I was like, yeah, like he's like a senior in college. Like it's really crazy.
All right, we're going to go to a short break here. And when we come back, Amari, you mentioned some of that competition in the offseason. They added some veterans. We got a ton of quotes from Troy Weaver, Joe Harris, Monty Morris about all of that stuff. We'll dive into those quotes when we get back from this short break.
All right, we are back with segment 2. And let's dive into Jalen Duren a little bit, because I asked Monty about Duren's defensive growth. And he mentioned he's gotten better at communicating. And then Duren, too, just talked about the game slowing down. Bryce, if Jalen Duren makes that defensive leap, like let's say he's just slightly above average as a rim protector compared to last season, just how much does that increase the floor for this team? Because people seem pretty high on just how much he's grown this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be huge. We've talked about this team needing to grow defensively, and I think that's really where it's got to start. At the end of the day, I think it has to start with Jalen Duren. We've taken a little bit of heat, Amari, because we've kind of critiqued Jalen Duren's defense and not as much with Jaden Ivey. But to me, the floor is raised or the ceiling maybe goes out, whatever, with Jalen Duren's defense more so than Jaden Ivey's, in my opinion, especially I think with what both of us believe about Ausar Thompson. So if Jalen Duren is doing those things defensively, I think Monty had a quote on him is his communication is much further along than most young guys. That's huge because Jalen is truly the anchor of your defense. So if he's calling the right coverages, calling the right switches, all of that stuff, that's going to be huge for this defense. And so I think that is one of the biggest things I'm watching for in terms of growth of individual players.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you want to hear, right? That, Duren took his rookie season and then just got in the lab and, studied what he could do better. Of course, he has the physical gifts to be one of the NBA's best rim protectors. So it's just learning the game at this point. And kind of like Cade, you forget how young Jalen Duren is, where he's younger than a lot of the rookies this year. He was the youngest player in the NBA last year, since he reclassified, to get to Memphis a year early. So for him to be where he's at, I think at 20 years old, is he 19 or 20 now? He turned 19 last year, so maybe he's still 19, which is just crazy, right? Like we're talking about like a 19-year-old kid who has 60, 70 NBA games under his belt. So I think along with that, we also saw, Duren handle the ball a little bit in Summer League. We saw him take a few jumpers. And, today, and this was a little bit prickly for fans, I know, Monty said that situationally they could play Duren at the 4 in big lineups. I feel like fans got like PTSD flashbacks like when they said that. And, we've talked so much about the 2 big lineup and everybody's picked it apart on social media as far as the, plus minus, like obviously way more minus than plus in the lineups last year. But I guess along with that, I am intrigued by what he could do at the 4 if some of that shooting translates. And where are you at on this, Bryce? Like, do you see any potential there for him to thrive next to a Isaiah Stewart at the 4 or a James Wiseman at the 4?
Yeah, so Jalen Duren's 19 years old. He turns 20 on November 18th. So we got a month here. Here's my thing when I first saw the Jalen Duren at the 4. I always try to go, okay, can I see this? Is this something that I would even want to see, consider? If Jalen Duren was playing the 4, I only see it working if you had a stretch big at the 5. which I don't think the Pistons have in James Wiseman or Marvin Bagley III. And so I don't see it working with the current roster, because if you say Isaiah Stewart, then in my opinion, Isaiah Stewart's the 4 and Jalen Duren's the 5. I do think those two can play together. Now, if you change what their role is defensively, Omari, that's a whole nother conversation. I can live in a world where you say, hey, Isaiah Stewart, you guard the other team's 5 and be switchable and play that way, and then let Jalen Duren be a roamer, right? That makes a lot of sense defensively to me. I could see that, but I don't think you can play Jalen Duren with a non-shooting big right now, especially if Ausar Thompson is on the floor as well. So there's some other dynamics here also. So that's where I'm at with it. If you want to play Jalen Duren at the 4, you better have a floor spacing 5, in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And maybe he's grown a lot as a shooter, and he'll be able to space the floor. And then you can pair him with a Wiseman or a Bagley and get away with it a little bit easier. I'll still probably want Bagley at the 4 in that instance. But either way, maybe there's some growth there that we just haven't seen. He did hit 3 at Summer League, but that's such a small sample size, so you can't really put a lot of stock into it. But clearly it's something that he's been working on. I'm just curious. I guess one, it'll be highly matchup dependent, right? So how many teams would it even make sense to play Jalen Duren at the 4? There's just not that many teams that have, I guess, those 2 tower front courts anymore. So it would just, to me, I think it would be a very situational thing. I don't think they're going to trot out a Jalen Duren at the 4 starting 5 to, begin the season. I didn't get the sense that this is going to be like a staple. He said, when we go big, which of course is very situational. But if Jalen Duren can shoot, then I think that changes the calculus a little bit. And he did say that Monty doesn't have handcuffs on anybody as far as that. If it's a good shot, he's going to take it. So we could see him dabble with that next season. So there's still some unknowns here, and I think we have to see it in practice. Maybe we'll see it as soon as next Sunday in preseason when they play Phoenix. But if he can shoot the ball a little bit, I think that opens things up significantly.
Well, what I do believe in Jalen Duren a little bit is him being able to dribble into DHOs and make passes and that type of stuff. He has some of those skills that I think it'll make it a little bit more reasonable. I just don't think we've seen near enough of the shot to think that that's something. And maybe we'll be proven wrong, or maybe I'll be proven wrong in his ability to do that. Like, to me, I'm like, let's do one of these projects at a time. We're trying to transition to Isaiah Stewart to the 4. Let's see if that works before we also start trying to do it with Jalen Duren. Omari, could you imagine if Monty Williams rolls out a Jalen Duren, James Wiseman front court starting lineup on opening night? I think the fan base would explode. I think that would break Twitter if that happened. Speaking of Isaiah Stewart, Omari, Troy Weaver said on Isaiah Stewart's extension, you always want to have a player or players on the team who are symbols for what you want to be about, and he's that on and off the floor. Who he is as a person and what he brings to practice, what he brings as a teammate. And Weaver reiterated that from a competitive standpoint, Stewart's absence was as big as Cunningham's last season. I think those are huge words and really explain why Troy Weaver gave Isaiah Stewart the contract that he did.
And Troy said that a few times, that he thought just from a competitiveness standpoint that Isaiah Stewart's absence was just as bad as Cade being out last season, which says a lot about how Isaiah Stewart's seen and respected in the locker room and just the way he carries himself, the fire that he plays with. I asked him about being more of a vet this season, not at your post-extension. And, he said he sees the younger guys going to him, looking for guidance on certain things. He worked a lot with Jalen Duren last season. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes aspects to Isaiah Stewart that may not come through to fans watching on TV. But I think that, along with the fact that he's already a plus defender, like he's been developing his shot, plus rebounder, you have the makings of a very versatile big as well. So it could be a big year for Isaiah Stewart. Honestly, I feel like we haven't talked about Isaiah as much this year, probably just because they have some new players in, and we've talked about Isaiah a lot over the last 3 years. But if he comes in and he can shoot 35, 36% from 3. The defense is still there. And, we see him and Cade kind of being the leaders on this team. Then that extension he got really is a fantastic value, in my opinion.
I had to laugh yesterday on Twitter. Somebody tagged me because I think it was just a random person had talked about the way Isaiah Pacheco, the running back for the Chiefs,
runs the ball.
Did you see it? And they used the Isaiah Stewart trying to chase down LeBron video to go with it. And I was like, this is the ultimate me tweet. This is perfect. I never in my life thought I would get the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Pistons merged into something that made sense. And it was like, oh, that absolutely makes sense with the way Pacheco runs and then that video of Isaiah Stewart. So I kind of had a laugh. I retweeted it. That was really good. That made my day seeing that. I didn't know if you saw that on Twitter or not.
I did. That's the only Pistons Chiefs crossover tweet I've ever seen. I actually bookmarked it because I thought it was that funny. I was like, I'm going to watch this later. Ed Pacheco is just from watching the Chiefs, he runs like every run could be his last. Like just an extremely violent, fun runner to watch. But I mean, again, like Isaiah Stewart has that edge. And I think if this team does get to the point where they're competing every night, I think some of those intangibles he has will begin to shine through more. And I just think this team being bad really hasn't done him any favors because, I think a lot of what happens behind the scenes has not been rewarded on the floor yet. So maybe we'll begin to see that this season.
And just to reiterate this, Stewart said, I definitely see myself more as a power forward now, especially having this group of bigs. A key this summer, even after talking to Coach Monty, is continuing to get comfortable with certain things he'll have me doing at the 4. So I know not everybody agrees with it. Not everybody likes it. Wes and I have talked about this in terms of still wanting to see Beef Stew at the 5. We don't want to see him 100% of his minutes at the 4 this year. Still want to see some minutes at the 5. But whether anybody likes it or not, the experiment of Isaiah Stewart transitioning to a 4-man is going to continue. And at the end of the day, I kind of agree with it, Omari. I think trying to move his game to the perimeter is better because he doesn't have that great vertical pop in the lane to finish over people, catch lobs, and those type of things. So I'm in support of it. I think it's going to work, but that's because I'm betting on who Isaiah Stewart is, kind of to go along with everything we've been saying here.
Yeah, I think Isaiah Stewart has a reputation as being this kind of like throwback, post-oriented player just because of how he looks and the way he's built. But he's really not that good of a finisher. Again, you mentioned he lacks the vertical pop. And, just touch-wise around the rim, it hasn't quite been where you would want to see from a center. So, again, if he shoots 35, 36% from 3, not out to run the math, but that's probably more valuable, just for the offense than him being in the paint. Where, he could kind of get lost in the trees a little bit sometimes. I mean, he's 6'8", he moves his feet well. I just think it's a pretty logical transition for him. But I am curious to see if he starts at the 4 and then shifts to the 5, and they just have essentially him and Duran taking most of those minutes, or if he's a full-time 4, and then you work one of Bagley or Wiseman in there. So, camp's going to be pretty telling this week, and Monty has some decisions to make for that front court, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and so to speak on that competition, and you mentioned it earlier, this came from Troy Weaver. Competition in-house is the best thing for us to grow. Veterans, they need young guys that keep them on their toes, and the young guys need veterans to keep them on their toes. But Coach Williams will put the best player on the floor. And then this was interesting from Monty Morris on what he's seen from the young players so far. He said, just talent, so much talent as far as teams I've been on. Definitely one of the 2 teams I've been on where the pickup games, they're very competitive. Both courts competing. And then he kind of elaborated. He said the intense offseason pickup games with the 2018-2019 Nuggets was the other team he was talking about. And he said, you couldn't tell the starters from the bench. We had some battles. It was fun, but just the feeling that I got with this team. So very interesting quotes from Monte Morris just on the competitiveness of these pickup games. And we talked about this, Omari, just the overall, like you're going to have to earn your spot, and Monty Williams has some tough decisions to make.
And that was a playoff Denver team because they won 54 games that season, and they won, I think, in the high 40s, like 47. The season before. So that was a very good Denver team, and they had momentum from the 47-win season. And, they got to work. He talked about those pickup games. He talked about how he was going against Jamal Murray. You had Torrey Craig going against Michael Porter Jr. You had Mason Plumlee battling against Jokic, and they were just really going at it. So, the fact that the Pistons, after a 17-win season, are matching the intensity of a Nuggets team that at that point was 4 years away from winning a title, but you still had 3 of the key guys on that team in there back then, and just the way they were going at it, I think really bodes well. I actually wrote about that, tonight, so check that out on freak.com, if you will. But along with that, they really want that competition level and that togetherness they had over the offseason to carry over on a defensive end this season. I mean, we saw how disorganized they were last year. Some of that was just injuries. They lost 300 games to injury, which was the second highest in the NBA. And then some of that was just being young as well. But I think it just put a bad taste in the mouth of this team. Like, we could be better than that. We know we're better than that. And a lot of guys individually we just talked about, like, you know, we really developed our chemistry this offseason, just getting to know each other, hanging out in LA for Rico Hines, Summer League, all the pickup runs they had here in Detroit. Like, it seems like that camaraderie is really strong. And Cade said he feels confident that they will be a lot better on defense just because of the togetherness that they've had. So all positive signs going into the season.
Speaking of some of that, I thought this was interesting, again, from Ausar. On the vet he spent the most time with, he said, Joe Harris, that's my locker mate too. That's my guy. He just gives me little things he's learned. He's going on his 11th year, so he's giving me things he's learned, especially playing with the greats, LeBron and Kyrie. I thought that was interesting that Ausar, the guy he picked out, the veteran he picked out was Joe Harris. I'm not saying that just because Joe Harris seems to be, you know, mentoring Ausar Thompson, that makes it all worth it and all of that. Because I know some people are not happy about the Joe Harris trade. I get it. I still think he has a little bit left and a role on this team, but it was interesting to me. And then this was also a very self-aware Joe Harris on his role. He said, I don't know, and we haven't discussed that. But to be honest, I'm not overly concerned with it. Whether it's playing 15 minutes or not playing at all, I think I can add value in any way. I just took a lot from that as a self-aware veteran who's going to come in, be ready when he's asked to be ready, but going to find ways to contribute even when he doesn't play. I loved hearing those quotes from Joe Harris personally.
You know, we haven't talked about Joe Harris just a lot, like, I feel like as a Pistons community, which is odd because if you look at, I mean, it wasn't the most transaction-filled offseason, but that was the biggest move. And I think that does speak to the depth that this team has, that it's like, how does Joe Harris fit in? He did get ahead of it by mentioning, you know, whether I played or not, or if it's 15 minutes, whatever, I will come in and contribute. But that's also the stuff that you don't see. It's just, you know, a guy like that could come in and he just takes a rookie under his wing and just, you know, gives him the way of the NBA, right? You know, I didn't know who Ausar was going to say. Like, you probably see in the back of your mind, it'll be one of the guys who were on the team last year, whether it's Bogey or Alec Burks who would do that. But, you know, Joe Harris came in. He said he wants to be an asset to the Pistons organization in any way he can. And, you know, and he spent a lot of time with Ausar. So some people on Twitter in my mentions say, oh, Ausar is definitely going to learn how to shoot now. And I did some research for a story last week. I think Joe Harris has even the third or fourth highest career three-point percentage in NBA history. So we're talking about like the most elite of elite shooters. So again, like bodes well, and I thought that was a really cool detail that him and Ausar have that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it can't hurt for him to be around somebody that can shoot the rock like that. One final one, Omari, before we go to our second break here. This was from Weaver. He said, it's not easy for ownership. This is the rebuild. It's not easy for the fans, but we're building it the right way so we can have a sustained model. We don't want to microwave this process. We want to put it in the oven and make sure all the ingredients got cooked the right way. Sustained model was the thing that stood out to me the most right there. Is we're not going to speed this up. We're not going to do something that's hasty or could put us in a bad situation for the future. We have a plan. We're going to stick to the plan. Whether fans want to believe in it or not is something entirely different. I've said this from the first day Troy Weaver took over. They had a GM that had a plan and he was going to see it through. I think we're seeing it. Again, I'm not guaranteeing it's going to work, but that quote stuck out to me as well. A sustained model, and they're going to stick to it. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, the thing is, you can absolutely derail years of rebuilding by casting in your chips too early. I mean, we saw the Pistons do that with Blake Griffin. We saw them do that with, Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva. I mean, you can go back and back, right? And other teams too. Sometimes you go all in on the wrong player and then you limit yourself financially, you limit yourself roster-wise, and it's really hard to, it can be really hard to dig yourself out of that hole. So, this is more so the reality of rebuilding where you don't know exactly how long it's going to go when you get into it. Of course, they wanted last season to be the leap forward. They want this year, and then Cade gets hurt, and then the season just gets derailed. So it's things like that you can't plan for. But Troy has reiterated since day one, we're not going to rush this thing. We're going to go as slow and steady as possible. And just look at the roster now compared to when he took over, and it's just like night and day, right? Like he's turned this roster over completely probably almost 2 times over, right? He has a handful of draft picks, but beyond that, it's just been a lot of transactions to increase the talent level for this team, increase the experience level, athleticism, like verticality, whatever you want to say. Just compared to what he took over, I would say the team is better off in every way. Youth-wise, talent-wise, they're better off. So it hasn't translated to wins, but they also have a very flexible cap sheet, going forward, which opens up a wide range of possibility. And I know people are like, well, they didn't do it this past season, so they hype us up for the cap space every year and don't do anything. But they're getting closer to the point where it will make more sense to make that type of dive and get a talent in who can really change things better for this team. So nowhere to go but up after a 17-win season, of course. But, I think if you just look at the entirety of the rebuild, like they're unquestionably in a better place than they were 4 years ago.
And I just always like to reiterate when we have these conversations, he didn't have Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert to trade and start a rebuild. He didn't have Damian Lillard to trade to start a rebuild. And so he really started with very little assets whenever he started this thing. And I think it's in decent position, but now they have to execute moving forward. These draft picks have to turn into dudes, and some of these other moves, especially the ones coming up, he's going to have to hit home runs on. We're going to go to a short break right here. Omari, when we come back, we have some quotes from Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey on Monty Williams, how excited he got when talking about playing with Jalen Duren. We have some off-season life of NBA players and what a few guys did, and we have some questions from the chat. We'll get into all of that right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 3. And as you alluded to before the break, a lot of Monty Williams talk today from the players and just the respect they have for him. So I'm going to find this quote from Cade Cunningham, which I just had it up and then I scrolled up by accident.
I got it. Okay, you got it?
Yeah, here we go. Cade in his relationship with Williams, we see a lot of things the same way. The main thing, I like how he carries himself outside of coaching, just the way he goes about connecting with people. I think it's amazing to watch. It's easy to follow behind someone like that. And then Jaden Ivey said, I'm blessed to be able to say he's going to be my coach. I have so much gratitude that I will get to learn from him, build a relationship with him, and it's something that over my career I haven't seen. It leaves me speechless because he's such an amazing person. So these are just like very glowing, doting reviews of Monty Williams so far. But again, I think it speaks to just the cohesiveness this team has and just the excitement to have somebody in Monty who has proven he can do it. He did it with Phoenix after they won 19 games before he took over. And, it was a pretty rapid improvement from there. So it just seems like the team has really bought into what they're preaching.
Omari, I saw the quote from Cade on Monty, and I was like, wow, that's really high praise from Cade. And then when I read the one from Jaden Ivey, I was like, holy cow. Like that is a dude going out of his way. And like you could almost feel the emotion just reading your tweet, like him saying, it leaves me speechless because he's such an amazing person and he feels lucky to be coached by this man. I think that speaks to who Monty Williams is, man. Like as someone who talks about this team weekly, watches 82 games, spends so much time, I was like, that's really cool that that's who's coaching this team and leading this organization now, that two of probably the two most important players, Omari, and Cade and Jaden Ivey, feel that way about their head coach. That's not to demean Dwayne Casey. I think they both probably had great relationships with Dwayne Casey as well, but that's really good stuff. I don't know. Maybe I don't watch enough media days from other NBA teams, but I can't imagine many quotes were coming out the way Jaden and Cade were talking about Monty Williams. So I wanted to make sure we touched on that because it really stood out to me for sure.
Yeah, you don't always hear like glowing reviews for coaches the way that the Pistons did today. So that definitely stands out. And I mean, you hear from everybody that Monty's, a great person. Like we know what he's been through family wise, and it just takes a lot of strength and perseverance to be able to do that. And he's commanded the respect from this team. Monty did mention like he knows, Dwayne didn't teach bad habits last year, right? Like things just kind of went askew at some point. So he's trying to come in and just find a different formula, right? Like how do we change this culture? How do we get things going the right way? But I mean, again, like we even saw him out in LA with the Rico Hines runs, hanging out with the team. So there's just been a lot of just like team building over the last few months. And I think it just shows that, these guys really like Monty Williams. I mean, you have that amount of buy-in. That's what you want to see going into training camp. You don't want to see cracks or fissures or anything. You want to see everybody on the same page, and it seems like they're all a big fan of him.
All right. I thought this was interesting. Cade smiled when asked what he hopes to accomplish with Jalen Duren this season. And then he said, quote, a lot. So I went and looked, Omari. Do you know how many minutes those two guys played together this past season?
Not that many.
79 minutes between Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren. Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey only had 283. For reference, Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey played almost 1,200 minutes together last season. Cade and Jalen Duren didn't even get 100. And Cade and Ivey didn't even get to 300. So I can't imagine that Cade Cunningham is super excited to play with Jalen Duren. Remember how good he looked with Marvin Bagley III whenever that trade happened? And I like Bags, but I think Jalen Duren's got a little more, vertical pop and stuff. I think there could be some real chemistry there. So, we've talked a lot about Cade and Ivey developing that backcourt, but Cade and Duren chemistry, running pick and roll and those type of things wasn't something I had thought about quite as much. Obviously, sounds like Cade is pretty excited for that to finally happen.
Yeah, Cade and Jalen spent a lot of time together this summer beyond the Team USA stuff in Vegas. JD also mentioned that he actually flew down to Dallas to hang out with Cade at home, because Cade is from Arlington, so he went down there. They spent some time together, had some pickup runs. And, he just talked about learning, where Cade likes his spots, just how he attacks the game, where he likes to pass to. So they've been really working on that chemistry this offseason. And again, that's just so few minutes. 79 minutes together. They really didn't even play together last season. They had time in practice, but no significant NBA time at all. And it's actually funny, we were talking to Alec Burks. I was like, I don't think you and Cade played together at all last season. I think Alec Burks made his debut the day after Cade played his last game, which is crazy. So again, there's just going to be so much newness this season. Cade being out last season really, that's 65% of this rebuild puzzle that was just completely missing. So him coming back, and we talk about the ceiling for this team, I'm probably in the 30 to 35 win range. We probably are too. I don't know if you are. I'm not going to speak for you. But along with that, if you look at reasons why this team could improve pretty rapidly, it's just because Cade is back, and last year's team really shouldn't have been a 17-win team to begin with.
We got a few more quotes that we'll get to if we have time, but I want to get to the questions, Omari. So if you're watching us live right now, first, thank you again to everybody. If you're listening on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whenever on Apple, Spotify, please leave us a rating and review. Help us continue to grow. But let's go to some of these questions. This is from Rashad. What do we do about Livers? He can't be depended on. We need a real shooting option at power forward. So Omari, I don't know that we can really talk about free agents. There's going to be some roster moves, right? There's still an open roster spot for the Pistons. I personally think you can still play Bojan minutes at the 4. I know Wes is definitely supportive of that. You talked about Ausar. Obviously, that's not a shooting option. I think we both believe in Stu a little bit, maybe more than the consensus as a shooter. I don't know what else you do there. That's kind of what you have on this roster. If there is one spot that's a little bit of a quote-unquote hole, it probably is that 4 spot and really stretching the floor from there. But I think Bojan can play the 4.
Yeah, he did it last season, and it's probably not his ideal position, but I think especially if you have a strong rebounder there, you could get away with it. And along with that, Livers being out also potentially opens up more minutes for James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley if Isaiah Stewart's going to play a lot more 4 to fill in for Isaiah Livers. So we have to see how well Isaiah Stewart shoots the ball. Of course, it's tough to say if he'll replace that shooting that Isaiah Livers provides. And if he were an Isaiah Livers shooter next season, that would be probably the best case scenario because Livers is around 38% for his career, and it's not even better than that in college. So rotation-wise, we will have to see, but I think you could play Bogey at the 4 and be fine and survive until Livers gets back in November at some point.
So a couple questions that build kind of off of each other. Our guy, RB Nesbitt, always supporting, says day 1 starter, ? I say yes. That was when we were talking about Ausar Thompson. And then our guy, Camille from Turkey, do you think Ausar will come off the bench or will be a starter in the first match? I think I would start him, Omari. We talked about this last episode with the all lineups. If you guys haven't watched that, go check it out. I don't think he ends up starting, though. I think we both agreed. We thought the Pistons would start Bojan, Stu, and Duren. I would start Ausar, but that's just me. I don't think that's what ends up happening, though.
Yeah, I honestly don't know, but I really could see Ausar starting, especially if like with Livers being out, that could open up more minutes for him playing either the 3 or the 4. So I'll see. He would be the first top 7 pick since Troy took over to not start day one, but obviously it's a new coaching staff and, depth-wise, they're in a completely different space as well. I think the lack of shooting probably hurts. You got to get as much shooting as you can around him to make up for that. But if you just want to set a really strong defensive tone early, then it does make sense to start him. So I'm not predicting that he will, but it would not surprise me if he does.
All right, this is from our guy, Doug McMiniman, and he has another one I want to talk about, but I want to stay on the Pistons for just a little bit. He said, Omari, any hints of possible deals like Bojan, or do you think this team is essentially set? So again, I've mentioned it a couple times just in passing, Omari. One open roster spot. Do you think that just ends up being the Thunder cut a player that the Pistons like? Jeremiah Robinson-Earl gets waived and the Pistons can sign him, or do you think there is a potential trade out there kind of floating in the universe?
Yeah, I think just probably the safest guess is that it will be a player who gets cut and then they just pick them up and bring them in, whether, that's a floor spacer or, power forward or whatever they deem necessary. And, Troy, he was very nonspecific when asked about it. He just said they want to maintain that flexibility and they're not necessarily looking for any particular position, but just a player who fits what they want to do just from a personality standpoint and obviously just a culture fit standpoint. I would be surprised to see Bojan traded, just because if you're trading one of your best offensive players, it's got to be worthwhile, right? Like, what are you getting back if you're trading Bojan? And I just can't imagine what that deal would be at this point in the season. Maybe some teams in the East get scared because of what, the Bucks in Boston did last week. And they decide, okay, we're just going to blow it up now. Maybe something comes there. Like, that's tough to predict, obviously. But I would be surprised to see Bojan traded before the season starts. And if he is, it would presumably be for a player who's going to be a star for this team or close to it. Or a lot like draft capital. Like, I should put that out there too. But it's got to be something worthwhile.
I kind of thought maybe that open roster spot was staying in because of the Dame trade or what then ended up being a Drew trade as well, where the Pistons could have got involved and just taken a player that needed a home, where none of that played out. I wonder if now they'll look to go ahead and obviously now they'll fill that roster spot, with somebody as we're closer to the season. But I kind of wonder if we were just like, hey, I'm going to leave an open roster spot here just in case we can land some player who needs to be involved for money purposes, but nobody else involved in the trade necessarily wants him. Let's keep moving through these. Appreciate you guys as you're getting these in here. From Sharon Dalton, do you think Sasser will spend more time in the G League this year? This is something we've talked about. The one caveat with all this depth and competition, Omari, is not everybody can play every night. And that backcourt depth seems pretty strong right now. Can't see why he wouldn't spend some time down there, unless he does crack the rotation, which I'm not predicting right now. So you might as well get him some minutes, in my opinion.
We knew how Dwayne Casey handled those G League assignments, and no first-round picks went to the G League under him except to, work their way back from injuries like Cade and Isaiah Livers did. And Phoenix, I believe, didn't even have a G League team until, this might be the first season for theirs. But, Monty didn't really have a G League system to lean on for most, if not all of his time down in Phoenix. So there's not really any precedent for how Marcus Sasser will be handled as far as that. Just rotation-wise, it's tough to see him getting those minutes unless, some players get hurt. So it probably will take an injury or, maybe late in the season for him to get those minutes. But when you play in the G League, I really don't know. I'm sure if he wants to allow him to do that. But so far, we just haven't seen any first-round picks do that. So it's really tough to say.
From RB again, question, do you think not having Casey's shot spectrum, I assume he's saying threes and at the rim, will free guys like Cade and Stu to kill from the mid-range more? I thought we saw that a little bit from Cade. And to be quite honest, I feel like he let Jaden Ivey do that a little more than what I anticipated. I'll be honest, guys, I don't keep track of these NBA coaches and kind of what their quote-unquote thing is. We tried to get some Phoenix Suns people on at a certain point when Monty was first hired. It never came to fruition, so we never got to it. But I feel like Booker, KD, Chris Paul, some of those guys were guys that operated in the mid-range. I'm not comparing the Pistons roster to those guys, obviously, Omari. But I feel like he has to allow Cade at the very least to do it. And again, I thought Jaden showed a ton of growth in that range as well. So I guess to answer your question, I would be disappointed if he doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, if they're good mid-range shooters, then, they'll be able to take them. Chris Paul, of course, was great from mid-range and always has been. Devin Booker was a good mid-range shooter, and those were shots that they took. And, Monty will prioritize ball movement, but Cade, I mean, he was really good for mid-range last season. That's a shot I think he'll go to and self-create. And it's like Duran said, he's not really going to put limits on guys. So, I'm sure they're going to maximize spacing and whatnot. But if that's the best shot, you take the best shot.
This is from our guy, Rocky. He says, can you guys explain the positive outlook of Ausar in the second unit and how he fits in that group? Again, we did this whole lineup episode last week. Go check that out if you haven't. I think what we kind of came to, though, Amari, is Ausar can essentially fit in any lineup. Like, he's very malleable in that way. I guess what you would see as the second unit right now is Monty and Burks aren't the greatest defenders, not super athletic at this point. So Ausar can really defend in that second unit. I don't know where the spacing comes from. If you're starting Boyan and Stu, who's playing at the 4 now, can you go super small, Amari, and play Joe Harris at the 3 and Ausar at the 4 with Wiseman or Bagley? Maybe you can get away with that with Asar's defensive rebounding. I think the biggest thing with Ausar is you just bring that energy off the bench now, right? Everybody talks about that kind of that energy guy. And I think that that's something Ausar could do. So I think what's hopefully special about Ausar is he can just kind of fit into a bunch of different lineups as long as there's enough shooting around him.
I'm curious to see just rotation-wise, do you bring him in early enough in the first quarter to take on some of those tougher defensive assignments? But, I mean, again, he's malleable. I think the second unit, just to have a guy with that level of defense and athleticism, a lob threat, somebody who could push the ball in transition and make the right pass. I think it really adds a lot of just zip to that unit, a lot of athleticism to that unit. And it could be really fun depending on who you put out there with him. So, whether he's staggered or it's just a full rotation, like 5 and 5, we'll see. But regardless, I think Ausar will be able to thrive and make an impact.
All right, we'll get to a few more here before we shut it down. Detroit for Life 1000. Even taking into his lack of positioning, doesn't Wiseman have the physical talent to be a positive? Here's what I'll say. Yes, James Wiseman physically is extremely intriguing. I know I've kind of been down on James Wiseman. Part of that was because I was so excited when they brought him in. I went and did the film breakdown. I talked to Warriors fans and people that watched a ton of games and were around the team and all that. And I got excited about what he could be. And maybe my expectations were too high, but it just didn't come to fruition last year, Omari. So in fairness to him, you get a whole offseason with this team. You get a chance to come in, training camp, all of that stuff. Maybe he's really good. But yes, there was a reason he was selected where he was selected, Omari. I just don't think we've seen it practically play out on the NBA floor yet.
Yeah, I mean, he's a legit 7 feet tall with a big wingspan and is a plus athlete as well. So I think the physical talent, really is the primary reason why they traded for him, because he just has tools that you can't teach. Of course, it's now learning how to apply them in a productive way. But they took a swing on upside, and Wiseman has that upside because of how well he moves for his size. I mean, again, I don't know why, but in the NBA, there's just a clear difference between 6'11" and 7 feet. I don't know why, but when the guy's 7 foot, it's just a little bit different, and he has that. So can't teach that. It's just him continuing to learn the game and apply that into the game.
All right, this is from Mel. Omari, did anything stand out to you about any of the new guys, including rookies, since you were there in person and got to feel their vibe? So anybody stand out, just the way they answered questions, their demeanor, anything like that?
I wasn't expecting Joe Harris to look like Jesus. He had really long hair, and I was just I didn't know he had that long hair. So that caught me. That was the first time we talked to Joe Harris today. So that was the first thing that went through my mind. Beyond that, we got to know the rookies pretty well at Summer League. We talked to Ausar, we talked to Sasser there, and we also talked to them when they were introduced to the media. Back in June. So not really a whole lot there, but just the guys we haven't talked to as much. Today was first time I talked to Joe Harris, and he was just pleasant to talk to, and he talked about his role and just working with certain guys and how he wants to help this team, just a real lack of ego. So I thought that was interesting. Second time we talked to Monte Morris today. I talked to him in Flint when they did the unveiling of that park a couple months ago, but today was his actual, I believe, first real media availability apart from that. And, again, like he's very personable. He has some really, really good quotes. Like he has some quotes that like I went back and transcribed and I was like, he kind of got like a bar off a little bit. Like like I'm scrolling down, I'm trying to find one of them now, but like he has some really good quotes and it's always great to have a veteran on the team who's a go-to and you just need to talk to him about a certain player or what the vibe of the team is right now. I feel like he'll be able to step into that role, which is great. And of course, he's local, so you can talk about Flint and whatnot, like local stuff, and that's always great. So we'll see. Like we know most of these guys. There wasn't a lot of roster turnover this offseason, so a lot of these guys we've talked to in the locker room, spent time with. But those guys specifically, just the ones we don't know. It's always fun to get to know, like especially veterans in this league, because they always have interesting insights that you don't get from such a young team.
Wes said, someone on Twitter said Joe Harris looked like Christian Bale. So I have not seen it. That's a good
one too.
I haven't seen it. I didn't watch Media Day. I literally just followed your Twitter feed and that's how I caught it. So I'm going to have to go search up a picture or something now. Speaking of people and how they looked in their Media Day, this is from Rashad. How do you think Jimmy Butler's new look will affect the Pistons' chances in the East playoff race? Did you see this picture? Did you see Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I hope my wife saw it. Like, that's my first thought was, I'm going to put this on Twitter because as I've talked about on here, my wife has a huge crush on Jimmy Butler. And I'm just going to be like, really? And so apparently this is what he does every year. He shows up looking different.
Here's the thing. Some women really like the emo look. So, maybe you'll learn something about Rainey now. I don't know.
Well, obviously, I have no chance. So if that's what she's into, then I don't know. Our 10-year anniversary is coming up on Thursday.
Okay.
And so if that's what she wants, she's been spending 10 years with not that. So.
Well, they have products that can get you that, if you ever want to go that direction. But what does it mean for the Pistons' chances in the East playoff race? That's a good question because, a man who has the confidence to just rock the complete emo look, you don't know what he might do. So we'll see. It was a little scary.
All right. Last one here. This is from our guy, Doug. Good evening, guys. Do you guys think of all the attention Milwaukee and Boston helps to keep the Pistons on the back burner, thus helping them surprise this season? I more so want to ask you, Amari, what are your thoughts on Damian Lillard to the Bucks and then eventually Drew Holiday to the Boston Celtics?
Yeah, I mean, the Damian Lillard to the Bucks hasn't even really clicked in my mind yet. And I saw their Media Day photo today, and he just looks so weird in a Bucks jersey, like as any player does when they first leave a team they've been with for a while. But still, it just looked especially weird because I don't even know if the Bucks were like the obvious team that was going to trade for him. They weren't really in the rumor mill as much. And, but they did need to do something because, Giannis has been kind of towing that line of like, I love Milwaukee, but I don't love Milwaukee so much and I won't leave if I can't win here. So, they had to do something. And just fit-wise, I mean, that's just about perfect. I don't really know how you defend Giannis and Damian Lillard. I don't think you can defend Giannis and Damian Lillard. I think just from a fit standpoint, that's like as good as it gets for like a big and one of the NBA's most elite shooters and ball handlers. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would assume that they're going to be the best team in the East. Drew Holiday in Boston, of course, is a big upgrade, because it gives you a lot of the defense you get from Marcus Smart, but also, he's a better offensive player. And that roster's changed so much that it's just kind of like shocking. Like they don't have Grant Williams anymore. They don't have, Robert Williams. They just traded him. Like no Marcus Smart, which is just insane to me. So, like we're seeing teams like we had like this great era for parity, and now we have teams that are like, okay, like we got to start making some big swings to kind of break out of this to separate ourselves. And it just seems like Boston, Milwaukee, and Phoenix are in their own category as far as that. Oh, Phoenix, a lot of their guys get injured a lot, so they're going to need some good luck to keep it together next year. But we'll see. I think just Boston and Milwaukee doing that makes the East more interesting in a way, because I think like parity is great, but it's also great to have two teams that it's just like who's going to bring them down. I'm curious to see if it forces a lot more Eastern Conference teams to hit the reset button before the trade deadline. Does Atlanta re-sign DeJounte Murray if they know this is going to happen? And now it's like, well, we're not going to probably win anything next year. So, what do they do? Like Miami, you didn't get Damian Lillard. So, like, what's the next move for you? And you lost some of your key role players over the offseason, which puts them in a tough spot. Embiid, I mean, James Harden reportedly didn't come, to their media day today. So, Philly has stuff to figure out. There's like this whole just chain effect of like, what do these teams do now that the ground kind of got swept from under them. And it doesn't really affect the Pistons at all, unless they end up being a playoff team, in which case it will, but does take some of the attention off the Pistons. And, we'll see if they can capture some of that with the Cade breakout this year.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested to see is I feel like you have two dominant teams in the East. So how does everybody else play this out whenever you have two teams that look that dominant, assuming they stay healthy? Omari, Pistons basketball is back. You're back in the building. Offseason O is gone for another year. Next time we pod, Omari, we will have real NBA basketball to talk about. I don't care that it's a preseason game. It's real basketball. It's not summer league. It's not Rico Hines. It's real basketball. We will record next Sunday evening after that Pistons game, after Omari does his article. Come join us for that. Thank you, everybody that joined us tonight. We kind of felt like maybe the fan base would start to come back a little bit, and you guys definitely showed out. We appreciate you. Again, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, leave a rating, review. If you're watching here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up, the like, the subscribe, all the stuff that you need to do on YouTube. We appreciate you guys. Omari, take it away, my guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that the first preseason game is next Sunday at 3 p.m. It's just, seems like it's a lot more compressed this year. We have like 6 days and it's just like, basketball. So that'll be exciting. And I'm always excited for 3 p.m. Sunday games anyway, because I get to be home by 7 p.m. While it's still daylight. I guess not anymore because it's like fall, but still always a good feeling. So thanks for tuning in. Excited to talk basketball next week. And I'll close this out. Big thanks to our editor, Robin Chan, audio producer, Robin Chan, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And also big shout out to Wes as always. We'll talk to you all next week.